I stood in the shadows of my own garage and listened to my son-in-law plan my funeral. He was laughing. He held a pair of wire cutters in one hand and my death warrant in the other. He thought he was cutting the brakes on a helpless old man's car. What he did not know was that he was actually cutting the brakes on his own life. Before I tell you how I turned his murder weapon into his prison sentence, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that karma always has a way of finding the wicked. It started at 2:14 in the morning. Insomnia is the curse of the aged, but that night it was my guardian angel. The house was silent, wrapped in the kind of stillness that usually brings peace, but I felt an itch in my bones. I put on my slippers and walked down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I needed to see her. My 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. She was not just a car. She was the last thing my late wife and I restored together. She was valued at $300,000, but to me she was priceless. As I reached the door connecting the kitchen to the garage, I saw a sliver of light bleeding through the crack underneath. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I had turned the lights off. I slowly turned the knob, grateful that I had oiled the hinges just last week. The door opened without a sound. There he was. Todd, my son-in-law. The man who had married my daughter Hannah 3 years ago. The man who claimed to work in real estate but mostly worked on draining my daughter's bank account. He was sliding out from under the chassis of my Mustang. He was wearing my mechanic gloves. He held his phone to his ear pressed between his shoulder and cheek while he wiped grease onto a rag. I froze in the shadows behind the tool rack. I should have yelled. I should have stormed in there. But then I heard him speak, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. "Yeah, Mom, it is done," Todd said, his voice echoing slightly off the concrete walls. I severed the line cleanly. The fluid is dripping out slowly. By the time he gets on the highway tomorrow for his checkup, the reservoir will be empty. I stopped breathing. I gripped the heavy wrench hanging on the wall next to me. My knuckles turned white. Todd laughed a low, nasty sound. "Do not worry about the investigation. Ideally, he crashes on the hairpin turn on Route 9. That drop is 200 feet. The car will be a crumpled tin can. No one looks for cut lines in a wreck that bad. They will just say the old man got confused and hit the gas instead of the brake." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. It was undoubtedly Beatrice, his mother. "Yes, the life insurance policy is solid," Todd continued. $5 million, plus the house, plus his patent royalties. "We will be set for life, Mom. We just have to get through the funeral acting sad." I have already practiced my eulogy. I felt a surge of rage so powerful I thought I might have a stroke right there. My hand raised the wrench. I wanted to rush forward and smash his skull. I wanted to end him. I took one step forward, but then I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of the truck parked next to the Mustang. I saw a 72-year-old man. My back was stiff. My hands trembled not from fear, but from age. Todd was 35. He was 6 feet tall and desperate. If I attacked him now, he would overpower me. He would kill me right here in the garage and claim I attacked him in a fit of dementia. He would win, no. Violence was a young man's game. I was an engineer. I solved problems with leverage and precision. I lowered the wrench. I watched as Todd stood up, admiring his handiwork. He patted the hood of my Mustang like a pet. "Sleep tight, Bernie," he whispered to the empty garage. I slowly backed out of the room, closing the door with the same silence I had entered with. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30. My appointment was at 9. I had 6 hours to live. Or rather, I had 6 hours to make sure that when that car left the driveway, I wasn't the one driving it. I picked up my phone. I did not call the police. The police need evidence, and evidence can be argued in court. I needed something stronger than the law. I needed absolute destruction. I dialed a number I had not used in years. I need a tow truck, I whispered into the phone. And do not bring a flatbed with a company logo. Bring the unmarked one. Then I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. I began to write a note. It was going to be the most expensive gift I had ever given, but the return on investment was going to be priceless. Todd wanted a funeral. I decided I should not disappoint him. The smell of frying bacon usually woke up my appetite, but that morning it smelled like treachery. I walked into the kitchen to find Todd standing over the stove wearing an apron that said "World's Best Griller." He was whistling. It was a cheerful, upbeat tune that made my stomach turn. He was celebrating my death day before I had even taken my first sip of coffee. "Morning, Bernie," he chirped, turning around with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "I made sure to give you a hearty breakfast. You need your energy for the drive to the specialist. The roads are a bit slick today, so you will want to be sharp." I sat down slowly, letting my joints crack, playing the part of the frail old man he believed I was. My daughter Hannah was already at the table scrolling through her tablet, looking tired. She smiled at me, completely unaware that her husband had spent the night sabotaging her father's car. "Thanks, Todd," I said, my voice raspy. I stared at the eggs. I wondered if he had put anything in them, but I decided he was too arrogant for poison. He wanted the car crash. He wanted the spectacle. Todd poured me a cup of black coffee, his hand steady. "So the appointment is at 9, right? You should probably head out by 8:30. Give yourself plenty of time to navigate those curves on Route 9. He was practically pushing me out the door. He checked his watch, then checked it again. The anticipation was radiating off him like heat from a radiator. He was picturing the police call he would receive in a few hours. I took a long, slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness. Then I set the mug down with a deliberate clatter. "Actually," I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin, "I am not going to the doctor today." The whistling stopped. The room went dead silent. Todd froze the coffee pot, hovering in midair. "What do you mean?" he asked, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "You have to go. It is for your heart, Bernie. You cannot skip these things." "My heart is fine," I lied. It was beating with the steady rhythm of a man about to drop a hammer. "But I have been doing some thinking, Todd, about what you said last week, about legacy, about holding on to things that we cannot take with us." I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the confusion clouding his gaze. "That Mustang," I continued, letting a wistful sigh escape. "It is too much machine for me. My reflexes are not what they used to be." "You were right about that. And I remembered how much your father Richard admired it at the barbecue last month." He could not take his eyes off the engine. Todd's face went pale. The color drained out of him so fast, I thought he might faint. "So I decided to do a good deed," I said, smiling the most innocent smile I could muster. "I called a tow truck an hour ago. They are picking up the Boss 429 right now. I am having it delivered to Richard's dealership as a surprise gift." Todd dropped the coffee pot. It shattered against the counter, splashing hot liquid onto the floor, but he did not even flinch. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. You gave the car to my dad," he stammered. His voice was an octave higher than usual. "Yes, isn't that wonderful?" Hannah chimed in, looking up from her tablet. "That is so generous of you, Dad. Richard will be over the moon. He has been having such a hard time with business lately. This will cheer him up." Todd looked at Hannah, then at me. Terror. Pure, unadulterated terror filled his eyes. He knew exactly what he had done to those brakes. He knew that the moment that car came off the flatbed, his father, a man known for his reckless driving and need for speed, would want to take it for a spin. I do not think that is a good idea, Bernie." Todd stuttered, wiping his hands frantically on his apron. Dad is busy. He does not have room for it. We should keep it here. I can drive it for you. Nonsense, I said, standing up and patting him on the shoulder. It is already done. Look out the window. Right on cue, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine shook the window panes. We all looked out to see the flatbed truck pulling away my gleaming blue Mustang secured on the back, heading straight for Richard's dealership. Todd reached into his pocket for his phone, his fingers fumbling. He needed to warn his father. He needed to scream that the car was a death trap. But he couldn't. Not with Hannah sitting right there. Not without admitting that he was the one who cut the lines. I watched him struggle, trapped in the web of his own making. Better call him and tell him to look out the window, I suggested helpfully. Tell him to enjoy the ride. Todd stared at me, and for the first time he saw something in my eyes that wasn't frailty. He saw the predator looking back. The hydraulic whine of the tow truck winch was the loudest sound in the neighborhood, but to me, it sounded like justice. I stood on the front porch watching the driver hook the heavy chains onto the undercarriage of my Mustang. As the front wheels lifted off the pavement, the car looked less like a classic vehicle and more like a blue steel coffin waiting for its occupant. I held a piece of cream-colored stationery in my hand. I had spent a moment crafting the message while Todd was hyperventilating in the kitchen. I walked over to the driver, a burly man named Mike who had towed for me before. I handed him the envelope. Make sure Richard gets this before he gets in, I said loud enough for Todd to hear from the open doorway behind me. It is a personal note. The note read simply, Richard. I know you have always envied how this car handles the curves. Today she is finally yours. Drive her like there is no tomorrow. It was the truth. There would be no tomorrow for the car, and likely not for the driver either. I turned back to the house. Todd was standing in the foyer, his face a mask of sheer panic. He had his phone in his hand, his thumbs flying across the screen. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was texting his father. He was typing the warning that would save Richard's life and ruin my plan. Do not drive the car. The brakes are cut. If he sent that text, the game was over. They would fix the car, claim it was vandalism, and come after me later. I needed to close the distance between us. I walked past him into the kitchen, heading for the sink, where a basin of soapy water was waiting from the morning dishes. Todd followed me, his eyes glued to his screen. I cannot believe you did this without asking Bernie, he muttered, his voice shaking. I need to call him and tell him how to handle the clutch. It is tricky. He was lying. He pressed the call button. I saw him lift the phone to his ear. I turned on the faucet, letting the water blast at full pressure. Oh, Todd, be a dear. And hand me that sponge, I said, pointing to the far side of the sink. He was distracted. He stepped forward, phone pressed to his ear, reaching across me. He was listening to the ringtone. 1 ring, 2 rings. Oops, I said. I shifted my weight, bringing my elbow up in a sharp, clumsy motion. I hit his forearm hard. It was a perfect strike right on the funny bone. Todd yelped, his hand spasming involuntarily. The expensive smartphone flew out of his grip, performed a perfect arc in the air, and landed with a heavy splash right into the deep basin of hot, soapy water. No, Todd screamed. He plunged his hands into the scalding water, fishing for the device. He pulled it out, water dripping from the charging port. The screen flickered once, showed a distorted image of the Apple logo, and then went completely black. My phone, he gasped, pressing buttons frantically. It is dead. I looked at him with wide, apologetic eyes. Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy today, I said, grabbing a towel and making a show of trying to dry it off. I am so sorry, Todd. My old elbows just aren't what they used to be. Put it in rice. Maybe it will turn back on in 24 hours. 24 hours, Todd whispered. He looked out the window. The tow truck was already turning the corner, carrying the death trap away. He looked at the landline phone on the wall. I had severed the cord to that one 3 hours ago. He was cut off. He ran to the window, watching the tail lights of the truck disappear. He banged his fist against the glass. He knew he could not chase the truck down on foot. He knew he could not ask Hannah for her phone without explaining why it was a life-or-death emergency. I stood behind him, drying my hands. "You look stressed, son," I said calmly. "Why don't you sit down? Richard is a big boy. I am sure he can handle a little speed." At Richard's used cars, the atmosphere was usually one of quiet desperation, with salesmen leaning against rusted sedans smoking cheap cigarettes. But when the flatbed truck rolled onto the lot carrying my pristine blue 1969 Mustang, the mood shifted instantly. It was as if a celebrity had walked into a dive bar. Richard waddled out of his glass office, his cheap suit straining at the buttons. He did not look like a man who was worried about his son-in-law committing murder. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. The driver handed him the keys and my note. I was not there to see it, but I know Richard better than I know my own brother. I know he read my words about envy and surrender, and he did not feel gratitude. He felt victory. He likely crumbled the note and tossed it into the gutter, believing that I had finally capitulated to his superior status. To him, this was not a gift. It was a tribute payment from a weak old man to the alpha of the family. He circled the car, running his hands over the hood, checking for scratches. He barked at his employees to come and look, preening like a peacock. "This is what real success looks like, boys," he probably shouted, ignoring the irony that the car belonged to the man he called a loser. He opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather groaned under his weight. He turned the key. The engine roared to life with a thunderous growl that shook the windows of the dealership. It was the sound of raw American horsepower, a sound that usually commanded respect. Richard revved the engine, letting the noise drown out any caution. He put his foot on the brake pedal to shift into gear. The pedal felt soft. It went down a little too easily, a spongy resistance that should have been a red flag to anyone who had spent 30 years selling cars. A smart man would have pumped the brakes. A cautious man would have turned the engine off and looked underneath. But Richard was neither smart nor cautious. He was arrogant. He assumed the old car just needed to warm up, or perhaps the fluid was a little low. He was too busy imagining how he would look cruising down the interstate to worry about mechanics. He shifted into first gear. The tires squealed as he peeled out of the lot, leaving his employees coughing in a cloud of blue smoke. He wanted to show off. He wanted to test the limits of the engine before he slapped a price sticker on the windshield. He turned right, heading straight for the on-ramp of Route 9. The speedometer climbed. 40, 50, 60. The wind whipped through the open window, messing up his comb-over, but he did not care. He was king of the road. He pushed the gas pedal harder, feeling the G-force press him back into the seat. He was approaching the first curve, the one that overlooks the valley. He decided it was time to slow down just a fraction, to drift through the turn like a professional racer. He lifted his foot from the gas and stomped on the brake. His foot hit the floorboard. There was no resistance. There was no friction. There was only the empty, terrifying feeling of a disconnect. The car did not slow down. In fact, gravity was now taking over, pulling the heavy steel beast faster down the decline. For the first time that day, Richard's smile vanished. He pumped the pedal again. Nothing. The realization hit him a split second before the panic did. He was in a missile, and he had no way to stop it. The midday news jingle cut through the silence of the living room like a siren. I was sitting in my recliner, carefully peeling a Granny Smith apple with a small paring knife. The long green strip of skin curled away from the fruit in one unbroken piece, a testament to a steady hand that my son-in-law mistakenly believed was trembling with age. Todd was pacing the room, chewing on his fingernails, waiting for his phone to ring. He still thought the only problem was a lost cell phone. Then the news anchor's voice dropped an octave, the way they do when tragedy strikes. "We have breaking news from downtown. A spectacular and terrifying crash has just occurred in the Diamond District." Todd stopped pacing. He turned toward the 60-inch screen mounted on the wall. The camera cut to a helicopter shot hovering over 5th Street. Smoke was billowing out of the shattered storefront of Vanderhoven Jewelers, the most exclusive and expensive jewelry store in the city. Embedded deep inside the showroom, surrounded by sparkling debris and shattered glass, was the unmistakable rear end of a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, my blue Mustang. Todd made a sound that was somewhere between a gag and a whimper. He took a step back, his legs hitting the coffee table, and he collapsed onto the sofa. His face went from pale to a translucent shade of gray. He watched as the news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Vintage muscle car plows through luxury storefront. No skid marks found. No skid marks. Those 3 words hit Todd harder than a physical blow. They confirmed exactly what he knew but could never say aloud. The driver had not tried to stop because the driver could not stop. "Holy cow," I said, slicing a crisp wedge of apple and popping it into my mouth. The crunch was loud in the silent room. "Is that my car?" I squinted at the screen, feigning poor eyesight. It looks like Richard decided to take a shortcut through the display window. Todd could not speak. He was hyperventilating. On the screen, paramedics were pulling a heavy-set man onto a stretcher. It was Richard. He was alive, but his legs were twisted at unnatural angles, and he was screaming at the police officers who were trying to restrain him. The reporter continued, her voice grave. "Witnesses say the vehicle was traveling at excess speeds coming off the highway ramp. It appears there was total mechanical failure. Preliminary estimates suggest the crash destroyed the main display vault. We are talking about millions of dollars in damages, not including the structural ruin of the historic building. Millions." I saw the calculation happening behind Todd's terrified eyes. He knew Richard did not have millions. He knew the insurance policy on the car was in my name, but the driver was unauthorized, and the vehicle had been tampered with. Bernie Todd finally choked out, his voice thin and reedy. That is Dad. He crashed." I took another bite of apple, chewing slowly, enjoying the sweetness. "I know," I said calmly, pointing the knife vaguely at the television. "You were right, Todd. Your father really does have a need for speed. He drives with such passion. It is a shame about the brakes, though. You would think a man who owns a car dealership would check the safety features before hitting the gas." I turned to look at him, my expression completely blank. Unless, of course, someone told him the car was in perfect condition. Todd looked at me, and for a second he stopped breathing. He saw the paring knife in my hand, steady and sharp. He looked back at the carnage on the TV, then back at me. The realization was starting to sink in. He was not just looking at an accident. He was looking at a bill that would bankrupt 3 generations of his family, and he was the one who had signed the check. "You should probably go to the hospital," I suggested, slicing another piece of fruit. "He is going to need a ride home. He certainly cannot drive that car anymore." The emergency room smelled of rubbing alcohol and cheap floor wax. It was a scent I associated with waiting for death, but today I was waiting for justice. Down the hallway, behind a thin blue curtain, Richard was screaming. His voice was raw and ragged. He was howling about his legs, about his ruined suit, and about suing everyone from the car manufacturer to the city road planning committee. The doctors had confirmed both his tibias were shattered. He would walk again, but he would never stride with that arrogant waddle of his ever again. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I watched a nurse rush past with a tray of syringes. I looked like a worried relative, but inside I felt the cold satisfaction of an engineer watching a bridge collapse exactly as predicted. Todd was not handling the pressure with the same grace. He was pacing back and forth in front of me, his designer shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He was sweating through his shirt. Every time Richard screamed, Todd flinched. The guilt was eating him alive, but he had nowhere to put it. So he decided to dump it on me. He stopped pacing abruptly. He turned toward me, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides. Before I could stand up, he grabbed me by the lapels of my jacket and slammed me back against the wall. "You did this," he hissed, his face inches from mine. Spittle flew from his mouth, landing on my cheek. "You knew. You knew that car was a death trap. You tried to kill him. You tried to kill my father." A security guard started to move toward us from the desk, his hand reaching for his belt. I held up a hand to stop him. I did not need security. I had the truth. I looked down at Todd's hands bunching up the fabric of my coat. Then I looked him dead in the eye. My pulse did not even speed up. "Let go of me, son," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was hard as granite. "Unless you want to explain to that police officer over there why you are assaulting a senior citizen." Todd's hands shook, but he did not let go. "You set him up," he whispered, tears of rage leaking from his eyes. "You gave him a broken car." I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a whisper that only he could hear. "Listen to me very carefully, Todd. That Mustang passed its state inspection 3 weeks ago. I have the paperwork in my safe. The mechanic certified that the brake lines were brand new steel-braided hoses. They were rated to last for 20 years. I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew this. He had seen the car in pristine condition. Mechanical parts do not just vanish, Todd. I continued tightening the noose. For those brakes to fail completely, someone had to physically crawl under the chassis and cut them. Someone with access to my garage. Someone who was inside my house last night. Todd's grip loosened. His knuckles lost their color. I brushed his hands off my chest and straightened my jacket. "I was asleep all night," I said, staring into his soul. "But you were up late, weren't you? You went down to the kitchen for water around 2 in the morning. Did you see anyone? Did you hear any metal snapping? Because if the police investigate, that is the first question they will ask. Who had the opportunity?" Todd took a step back. He looked like he was about to vomit. He realized in that moment that he could not accuse me without confessing to his own crime. He was trapped in a box of his own construction. I sat back down and picked up a magazine. "I think you should go sit with your mother, Todd," I said without looking up. "She looks like she needs someone to tell her everything is going to be okay, even if it is a lie." Beatrice did not arrive at the hospital like a grieving wife. She arrived like a lawyer seeking a settlement. The double doors swung open, and there she was wearing a fur coat that had seen better days and holding a designer handbag that looked suspiciously like a knockoff. She did not rush to the nurse's station to ask if her husband was alive. She did not run to Todd to comfort her weeping son. Her eyes scanned the room, locked onto me, and narrowed into slits. She marched straight past the trauma unit where Richard was currently having titanium rods inserted into his legs. She stopped directly in front of me, opening her purse with a sharp snap. "Bernie," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "I just spoke to the administration desk. They need a credit card on file for the surgery. Since you are the owner of the vehicle that caused this disaster, I told them you would be handling it." She thrust a clipboard toward my chest. It was the financial responsibility form. I looked at the paper, then up at her face. Her makeup was perfectly applied. There were no tear tracks. "Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice low and level. "Your husband is lying on an operating table. He might never walk normally again. Is this really your priority right now?" Her eyes flashed. "Do not lecture me on priorities. Richard is going to be out of work for months. That dealership barely breaks even when he is there. Without him, we have no income. And now, thanks to your little gift, we are facing a lawsuit from Van der Hoven Jewelers." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. $2 million, Bernie. That is what they are estimating the damage to be. Richard does not have that kind of coverage. But you do. I know about your patent royalties. I know about your investments. She tapped a manicured fingernail against my chest. You are going to pay for the store. You are going to pay for the surgery. And you are going to pay for Richard's pain and suffering. If you do not, I will sue you for gross negligence. I will tell every judge in this state that you knowingly gave a defective vehicle to my husband because you were jealous of his success. I looked over her shoulder at Todd. He was slumped in his chair, head in his hands. He knew the truth. He knew that if this went to court, the forensic investigation would reveal the cut brake lines. He knew his mother was threatening to launch an investigation that would send her own son to prison. Does Todd agree with this plan? I asked, nodding toward him. Beatrice laughed, a harsh barking sound. Todd is too soft. He respects you too much. But I am a mother, and I have to look out for my family's future. Since you clearly do not care about your own blood, I have to be the bad guy. Now sign the papers, Bernie, or I call my lawyer right now. I stood up slowly. I did not take the clipboard. I did not reach for my wallet. You go ahead and call your lawyer, Beatrice, I said, buttoning my jacket. In fact, call two. Because if you think I am paying $2 million for an accident caused by your husband's driving and your son's handiwork, you are going to need a lot of legal help. I walked past her toward the exit. I could feel her staring daggers into my back. She did not know it yet, but she had just declared war on the one man who had the ammunition to destroy her. The doors to the waiting room swung open again, but this time it was not a predator walking through them. It was the prey. My daughter Hannah rushed in looking like she had aged 10 years in a single morning. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her hands were trembling as she scanned the room. When she saw me, she did not run into my arms for comfort. She stopped and looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation that broke my heart faster than any weapon could. Todd was still sitting in the corner watching us like a hawk. I knew instantly that he had sent her. He and his mother had realized that threats would not work on me, so they had deployed their most effective weapon. My own flesh and blood. Hannah walked over to me and grabbed my hands. Her palms were clammy. Dad, please, she begged, her voice cracking. You have to help us. Beatrice says they are going to lose everything. The dealership, their house, even our house. They are going to be on the street. I looked down at my daughter. I saw the bruises on her spirit. I saw how she flinched when Todd shifted in his chair across the room. She was terrified not of poverty, but of his anger. Honey, I said gently, pulling my hands away. This is not our debt. Richard crashed the car. Richard caused the damage. But the car is yours, she cried, cutting me off. Dad, I know you have the money. I know about the patent buyout from last year. Mom told me before she passed. You have enough to cover the damages and pay for the surgery. Please just write the check. If you do not, Todd says he will leave me. He says he cannot stay attached to a family that destroyed his father. I looked over at Todd. He smirked. He had weaponized his own marriage. He was holding my daughter hostage to get to my bank account. I stood up and placed my hands on Hannah's shoulders. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to scream that her husband had tried to murder me in my garage less than 12 hours ago. But I knew she was not ready to hear it. She was too deep in his fog. If I told her now, she would think I was making up lies to save my money. No, Hannah, I said firmly. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. What, I will not pay a single dime, I said, my voice loud enough for Todd to hear. I will not bail them out of a disaster they created. Hannah staring at me and her face twisted into something ugly. It was the face of a child who feels betrayed. You are a monster, she spat out the words, hitting me like bullets. You care more about your money than you do about my happiness. Mom would be ashamed of you. She would be disgusted to see you sitting here on a pile of cash while my family is destroyed. The mention of my late wife was a low blow, one that I knew Todd had coached her to say. It tore a hole in my chest, but I did not flinch. I had to be the villain in her story today so I could be the hero who saves her tomorrow. I am sorry you feel that way, I said. turning my back on her to hide the moisture in my eyes. But the answer is no. Hannah sobbed a sound of pure anguish and ran to Todd, who wrapped his arms around her while glaring at me with triumph. He had what he wanted. He had isolated me completely. He had turned my own daughter against me. He thought he had broken me. He did not realize that by taking away the last thing I had to lose, he had only made me more dangerous. The legal system is designed to protect the weak, but in the hands of the wicked, it is a weapon of mass destruction. I did not have to wait long for their next move. Less than 24 hours after the crash, a man in a rumpled gray suit knocked on my front door. He did not look me in the eye. He just verified my name and shoved a thick envelope into my chest. "You have been served," he mumbled before hurrying back to his car as if he knew he was part of a crime. I took the papers into the kitchen and laid them out on the table. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned as I read the legal jargon. It was an emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The plaintiffs were listed clearly: Todd and Beatrice. The reason for the petition was listed in bold print: advanced senile dementia resulting in reckless endangerment of life and property. They were using the crash against me. They had taken the wreckage of the Mustang and twisted it into evidence of my insanity. The document claimed that I had hallucinated a conversation with Richard, gifted him a broken vehicle in a state of confusion, and was now a danger to myself and others. It was a masterpiece of fiction, woven together by a lawyer who clearly charged by the lie. I reached for my phone to call Baxter, my attorney, but before I could dial, I decided to check my accounts. I needed to move some funds. I needed a war chest. I logged into my primary banking app. The Face ID spun for a second, and then a red box popped up on the screen. Account frozen. Please contact your branch. I tried my investment portfolio. Account suspended. Court order number 4492. I stared at the screen. I was a man worth millions of dollars, but in that moment I could not even buy a gallon of milk. They had moved faster than I anticipated. They had found a judge willing to sign an emergency ex parte order, likely by showing him photos of Richard's mangled legs and claiming I was about to flee the country or burn through my savings. The front door opened. I did not have to look up to know who it was. The smell of cheap cologne and unearned confidence filled the room. Todd walked in twirling a set of keys on his finger. "My keys." "I see you got the paperwork, Bernie," he said, closing the door behind him and locking it. His voice had changed. The nervous stutter was gone, replaced by the arrogance of a jailer. "You froze my accounts," I said, keeping my eyes on the papers. "You committed perjury to do it, but you did it." "It is for your own protection," Todd said, walking over to the fridge and helping himself to a beer. "The court agrees that you are not capable of managing your finances right now. Not after what you did to Dad. We are just stepping in to make sure you do not hurt anyone else." He took a long sip of beer and leaned against the counter, smiling. "And since Hannah is the court-appointed temporary guardian and I am her husband, that means I am in charge of the household expenses now. We are going to have to make some changes, Bernie. This house is too big for one old man. The upkeep is a waste of resources." He was not just freezing my money. He was announcing the eviction. He was going to sell my home, my sanctuary, to pay for his father's mistakes and his own gambling debts. He thought he had cut off my supply lines. He thought a frozen bank account meant I was powerless. He forgot that I grew up poor. He forgot that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man on earth. I closed the laptop slowly. "Enjoy the beer, Todd," I said softly. "It might be the last cold one you have for a long time." The morning the social worker was scheduled to arrive, Todd brought me my breakfast in bed. It was a gesture that should have been kind, but coming from him, it felt like a ritual sacrifice. He placed a tray on my lap with toast orange juice and my daily pill organizer. "Here you go, Bernie," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You need to take your blood pressure medication. We do not want you getting agitated when the lady from the state comes to visit. I looked at the small white tablets in the Wednesday compartment. They looked identical to the lisinopril I had been taking for 10 years. I swallowed them down with a gulp of juice, watching Todd hover by the door. He did not leave until he saw the Adam's apple bob in my throat. 20 minutes later, the world began to tilt. It started with a numbness in my fingertips, then a heavy fog rolled into my brain. My tongue felt like it had swollen to twice its size. I tried to stand up to go to the bathroom, but my knees buckled, and I had to grab the dresser to keep from hitting the floor. This was not blood pressure medication. I had been an engineer long enough to know when a system had been tampered with. He had swapped my pills for heavy sedatives. The doorbell rang. It sounded miles away. Todd came in guiding a woman in a beige business suit into my bedroom. "This is Mrs. Gable from Adult Protective Services," Todd said softly. "Dad, can you say hello? I tried. I really tried. I wanted to say..." He drugged me. "Call the police." But what came out of my mouth was a slur of incoherent vowels. Ooh. Mrs. Gable looked at me with pity. She opened her notebook. "Mr. Walsh, do you know what year it is?" My brain screamed the answer. It is the year my son-in-law stole my life, but my lips would not cooperate. 2020 car. I mumbled, drool pooling at the corner of my mouth. I fought the heaviness in my eyelids, but it was like trying to hold up a collapsing building. Todd sighed a long, tragic sound. "See what I mean?" He gets like this every morning. Total disorientation. Yesterday he tried to put the cat in the microwave because he thought it was a frozen dinner. I had never done that. I did not even own a cat. I tried to lift my hand to point an accusatory finger at him, but my arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It flopped uselessly onto the mattress. Mrs. Gable wrote something down. The scratching of her pen sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "It appears the decline is quite rapid," she murmured. "It is heartbreaking," Todd said, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "We just want to keep him safe. He wanders off. He gets violent. We need the legal authority to make sure he does not hurt himself." I looked at Todd through the tunnel vision that was closing in on me. He was not looking at the social worker. He was looking at me, and for a split second, the mask of the grieving son slipped. He winked. A quick, subtle wink that told me he knew exactly what he was doing. He had turned my own body against me. Mrs. Gable closed her notebook. "I have seen enough. I will recommend the immediate granting of the temporary guardianship order." I wanted to scream. I wanted to roar. But the darkness swallowed me whole, and the last thing I heard was Todd thanking her for saving me. I did not get a day in court. I did not get to look a judge in the eye and explain that my son-in-law was drugging my oatmeal. I woke up from a chemically induced fog to find a piece of paper on my nightstand. It was an emergency order for temporary conservatorship. Technically, it appointed my daughter Hannah as my legal guardian. But as I looked at Hannah standing in the doorway, wringing her hands and looking at the floor, I knew she was not guarding anything. She was just the signature on the paperwork. The man holding the leash was standing right behind her. Todd walked into the room with a strut that I had not seen since his wedding day. He was holding a cardboard box. "We need to secure the environment," he announced. His voice was bright and chipper like a camp counselor talking to slow children. "The judge agrees that you are a flight risk, Bernie. And given your history of giving away expensive assets, we need to limit your access to dangerous items." He walked over to my bedside table. He picked up my iPhone. "We will keep this safe for you," he said, dropping it into the box. "No more prank calls to tow truck companies. No more confusing text messages. If you want to talk to someone, just ask me or Hannah. We will decide if it is appropriate." I sat up in bed, my head still swimming from the sedatives. "That is my property," I rasped. "It is family property now," Todd corrected. He reached for the wallet on the dresser. He opened it, and pulled out my black American Express card. He held it up to the light, admiring the weight of it. "You do not need this," he said. "You have a roof over your head and food in the fridge. What would an old man with dementia need to buy anyway?" He tossed the wallet into the box. Then came the final indignity. He reached into the pocket of the jeans I had worn yesterday. He pulled out the keys to my Ford F-150 pickup truck. It was the only vehicle I had left. "Driving is out of the question, obviously," he said, jingling the keys in front of my face like he was teasing a baby. "We cannot have you plowing into any more jewelry stores. I will take care of the truck. It might actually fetch a good price if we sell it quickly." Hannah made a small noise in her throat. "Todd," she whispered, "that is his truck. He loves that truck." Todd spun around, his face hardening instantly. "Hannah, do not start. We are doing this for his own good. Do you want him to kill someone? Do you want us to be homeless because he decided to give away the house next?" Hannah shrank back into the hallway, silenced by his aggression. Todd turned back to me, smiling that sickening smile. He patted my cheek. His hand felt cold and moist. "Do not worry, Dad," he said. "I am the man of the house now. I will make all the hard decisions so you do not have to. You can just relax and fade away." I said nothing. I let him take the plastic cards. I let him take the keys. I let him take the phone. He thought he was stripping me of my power. He did not realize that by taking away my distractions, he was leaving me with the one thing I needed most: my focus. I watched him walk out of the room with my life in a cardboard box, and I began to plan. The heavy oak door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. Then came the sound that every prisoner dreads, the metallic slide of a deadbolt locking into place. Click. I stood at the bottom of the wooden steps, staring up at the door I had installed myself 20 years ago. It was solid oak reinforced with steel. I had built it to keep thieves out of my workshop. Now it was keeping me in. I turned around to face my new reality. The basement was exactly as I had left it, but the context had changed completely. For 3 decades, this had been my sanctuary. It was where I rebuilt engines, where I fixed broken toasters, and where I taught Hannah how to use a drill. The air still smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and old memories. But now the shadows seemed longer, and the concrete floor felt harder. I reached for the light switch. A single naked bulb flickered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow over the workbench. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The second thing I noticed was the cold. It was December in Chicago, and the basement was usually kept warm by the central heating unit that sat in the corner. I walked over to the radiator on the wall. I placed my hand on the metal fins. They were stone cold. I followed the pipes back to the utility panel. The wires leading to the basement zone valve had been ripped out. The copper ends were jagged and bright. This was not a malfunction. This was torture. Todd knew that at 72 years old, my circulation was poor. He knew that the cold settled into my joints like broken glass, making every movement an agony. He wanted me weak. He wanted pneumonia to do what he did not have the courage to do himself. I wrapped my arms around my chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. I was wearing nothing but thin cotton pajamas and house slippers. The chill was already starting to bite through the fabric, making my teeth chatter uncontrollably. Above me, I heard footsteps. The door opened just a crack. Todd did not come down. He just put his mouth to the gap. "Hey, Bernie," he called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. I turned the heat down a bit. "Energy costs are skyrocketing, and since you are not contributing financially anymore, we have to make cuts. You understand, right?" I did not answer him. I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing my voice tremble. "If you get cold, just do some jumping jacks," Todd laughed. Or maybe you can burn some of that old junk you keep hoarding down there. Sleep tight, old man. The door slammed shut again. I shuffled over to my workbench, my knees aching with every step. I found an old canvas drop cloth that I used to cover the Mustang when I was painting. It was stiff and smelled of turpentine, but it was thick. I wrapped it around my shoulders like a shawl. I sat down on my metal stool, shivering violently. The cold was a physical enemy attacking my fingers and my toes, but it also had an unexpected side effect. It woke me up. The last remnants of the sedative were burned away by the freezing air. My mind was clear, sharp, dangerous. Todd had made a critical error. He had locked a master mechanic inside a machine shop. He saw a basement full of junk. I saw a room full of weapons. I looked at the soldering iron. I looked at the cans of chemical solvent. I looked at the electrical panel. He thought he had buried me. He did not realize he had just planted me. I pulled the canvas tighter and started to work. The cold was no longer just a temperature. It was a predator gnawing at my bones, but my mind was burning with a feverish intensity. I knew every square inch of this basement. I had poured the concrete floor myself in 1982. I had framed the walls. I knew where the shadows fell and where the spiders spun their webs. So when I looked toward the far corner behind the decommissioned water heater, I noticed something that did not belong. There was a stack of old cardboard boxes that I had flattened for recycling 3 years ago. They had been moved. They were pulled forward, creating a makeshift screen to hide something in the darkest recess of the room. I dragged my frozen feet across the floor, my slippers shuffling against the concrete. My breath came out in white clouds of vapor. I reached the corner and pulled the cardboard aside. My heart, which had been beating slow and heavy from the cold, skipped a beat. Hidden there were 4 red plastic jerry cans, 5 gallons each. I did not have to unscrew the caps to know what was inside. The faint, sharp scent of gasoline was already leaking into the stale air. 20 gallons of accelerant. Enough to turn this house into a fireball visible from space. But the gasoline was just the fuel. I needed to know the ignition source. I dug deeper, moving the cans aside. Taped to the back of the rearmost can was a piece of paper. I held it up to the dim light of the single bulb swaying overhead. It was a blueprint of the house. My house. But someone had taken a red marker to it. There were circles drawn around the electrical panel in the hallway upstairs, another circle around the gas main intake, and a third circle right here in the basement, directly above the spot where I was standing. The handwriting in the margins was messy and frantic. It was Todd's handwriting. I squinted to read the notes. Circuit overload, fry wiring, accidental cause. The picture became terrifyingly clear. Todd did not just want to sell the house. He knew that selling a house with a stubborn old man living in it was difficult. He knew that even with guardianship, I would be a burden. I would require care. I would require money. His plan A was the car crash. He wanted me to die on the highway so he could collect the insurance and the estate. But I had survived. This was plan B. He was going to strip the house of everything valuable. He would sell the furniture, the electronics, maybe even the copper piping if he had time. And then one cold night, he would claim there was an electrical fault. A tragic accident caused by old wiring in an old house. The fire would start in the basement. The accelerant would ensure it spread too fast for anyone to stop it. And I would be the tragedy. The confused elderly father-in-law, who sadly could not find his way out of the burning home. I looked at the red cans and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He was going to burn me alive. He was going to turn my sanctuary into my crematorium. I carefully put the paper back. I moved the boxes back into place. I could not let him know I had found his stash. If he knew, I knew he might accelerate the timeline. He might strike the match tonight. I retreated to my workbench, my mind racing faster than it ever had in my engineering days. Todd thought he was clever. He thought he had designed a perfect closed-loop system for murder. But he had forgotten one variable. He had locked me in with the fuel. And he had forgotten that before I was a businessman, I was a sapper in the army. I knew how to handle explosives. I knew how to redirect energy. If Todd wanted a fire, I decided I would give him one. But it would not be the fire he was expecting. I picked up a roll of copper wire and a pair of heavy-duty cutters. My hands were not shaking anymore. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy clank that vibrated through the floorboards. It was feeding time at the zoo. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, sending a draft of warm air down into my freezing cell. It carried the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary, a stark reminder of the comfort I had built, but was no longer allowed to enjoy. Todd appeared on the landing. He did not come down the stairs. He treated the basement like a leper colony, afraid that my bad luck might be contagious. He was holding a paper plate. He leaned over the railing and tossed it. The plate fluttered down like a wounded bird, landing face down on the concrete floor. A few cold crusts of pizza and a half-eaten breadstick spilled out onto the dust. "Dinner is served," Todd announced, his voice echoing off the cinder blocks. "Sorry, it is a bit cold. We were celebrating upstairs and I almost forgot about you." I did not move toward the food. I stayed sitting on my workbench stool wrapped in the canvas dropcloth, watching him with the patience of a sniper. "We have big news, Bernie," he continued, leaning casually against the doorframe. "I finally found a buyer for the house. A cash buyer from the city. They put in an offer this afternoon. $1.5 million. Can you believe that the deposit is already in my account?" He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "They want a quick close," he said. 10 days. They are going to gut the place, renovate everything, which means you need to be out of here. I was thinking of moving you to a state facility in the morning. It is a bit crowded and I hear the staff is rough, but hey, beggars cannot be choosers, right? He was trying to provoke me. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy. He wanted to feel powerful. But I looked at him, and I did not see a powerful man. I saw a terrified amateur who was trying to outrun his own shadow. I slowly stood up. My joints popped, the sound loud in the quiet basement. I took a step toward the stairs, stopping just where the light from the hallway met the darkness of the pit. "Todd," I said. My voice was raspy from the cold, but steady. What he snapped, clearly annoyed that I was not weeping. "Do you have something to say?" "A thank you, maybe." I tilted my head, looking at him with genuine curiosity. "When you cut the line on the Mustang," I asked softly, "did you remember to wipe the corrosive residue off the chassis frame?" Todd froze. His smile evaporated. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice jumping an octave. "Brake fluid is highly corrosive, Todd," I explained, speaking like a professor lecturing a slow student. "When you sever a braided steel line, the fluid sprays under pressure. It strips paint instantly. If the forensic team looks at the undercarriage, they won't just see a cut line. They will see a spray pattern of bare metal on the frame. That is not mechanical failure. That is a fingerprint of sabotage." I took a small step closer to the stairs. "Did you wipe it, Todd, or is the evidence of your felony rusting onto the metal right now, waiting for the insurance adjusters to find it tomorrow morning?" Todd did not answer. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his breathing shallow. He looked like he had seen a ghost. For a moment the silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. He realized then that I wasn't just a senile old man locked in a basement. I was a witness. He slammed the door shut so hard the frame shook. The lock clicked into place with frantic speed. I heard his footsteps retreating quickly down the hallway, running away from the truth. I looked down at the cold pizza on the floor and smiled. I had planted the seed of panic. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. The silence upstairs told me that the warden had left the prison. Todd had gone to the local bar to toast his victory with shots of tequila paid for by the deposit on my house. I was left alone in the dark with the rats and the cold, But around midnight, the deadbolt clicked. It slid back slowly, quietly, as if the person on the other side was afraid of waking a monster. The door opened, and a beam of hallway light cut through the gloom. Hannah stood there. She was holding a heavy down comforter from the guest room. She looked down at me, shivering under my canvas dropcloth, and I saw her crumble. The wall of denial she had built around herself cracked just a little. "Dad," she whispered, hurrying down the stairs. "Oh my God, you are freezing." She draped the comforter around my shoulders, tucking it in tight like she used to do for her dolls when she was 6. Her hands were warm, but her eyes were cold with fear. She sat on the edge of the workbench next to me, avoiding my gaze. "Where is he?" I asked, my teeth still chattering. "He went out," Hannah said, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "He needed to blow off some steam. He has been under so much pressure, Dad. Dealing with the accident and Richard's surgery and the house sale. He is just trying to hold it all together." I looked at her. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes, and the way she flinched at the shadows. She was parroting his words. She was reciting the script he had drilled into her head. "He locked your father in a basement with no heat in the middle of winter, Hannah," I said, keeping my voice flat. "That is not pressure. That is attempted murder." Hannah stood up abruptly, shaking her head. "No, do not say that. He turned the heat down to save money. He did not know it would get this cold down here. He loves you, Dad. He is doing this for your own good. He found a great facility for you. It has a garden. He says you will be safer there where professionals can watch you." I listened to her defend the man who was systematically destroying us, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. I realized then that I had made a mistake. I had been trying to protect Hannah from the ugly truth. I thought that if I solved this on my own, I could spare her the pain of knowing she married a sociopath. But I was wrong. Silence was not protecting her. It was enabling him. Hannah was not going to wake up on her own. She was too deep in the fog of his manipulation. If I wanted to save her, I had to hurt her. I had to take the image of the husband she loved and smash it into a million pieces right in front of her eyes. I had to be cruel to be kind. "Hannah," I said sharply, cutting off her ramblings about how nice the nurses would be. "Stop talking." She froze, looking at me with wide, startled eyes. "You think Todd is a hero?" I said, standing up and letting the blanket fall. "You think he is saving this family? But you are wrong. And I am not going to argue with you anymore. I am going to show you." I walked over to the stack of old tires in the corner. I reached inside the bottom tire and pulled out a heavy black waterproof case. It was my old tool diagnostic kit, but inside was something much more valuable than a wrench. Hannah watched me, her breath hitching. "Dad, what is that?" I walked back to her and placed the case on the workbench. "I am going to show you something, Hannah," I said, my hand resting on the latch. "And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Are you ready to meet the real Todd?" I lifted the heavy lid of the diagnostic case. Inside, nestled in the custom foam cutout where my OBD scanner used to be, was a cracked iPad. It looked like junk, which is why Todd had ignored it when he raided my electronics. But he did not know that this old tablet was synced to a tiny motion-activated camera hidden behind the ventilation grate in the garage. "Open it," I said, stepping back so Hannah could approach the bench. "The passcode is your birthday." Hannah looked at me, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type the numbers. She unlocked the screen. The interface was simple. A list of video files, each time-stamped. "Play the one from 2:14 a.m. yesterday," I instructed. She tapped the screen. The video loaded. The grainy black and white footage showed the underside of the Mustang. Then a figure crawled into the frame. It was unmistakable. Even in low light, Todd's silhouette was clear. He was holding the wire cutters. Hannah gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. But the visual was not the worst part. I reached over and tapped the volume icon. Todd's voice filled the cold basement, tinny but clear. "Yeah, Mom, it is done." I severed the line cleanly. Hannah froze. She was hearing her husband, the man she shared a bed with, planning to murder her father. She watched as he wiped the grease on a rag and laughed. "Wait," I said softly. "Keep listening." On the screen, Todd was crawling out from under the car. He stood up and brushed himself off. He was still on the phone with Beatrice. "And do not worry about Hannah," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She won't suspect a thing. She is so desperate for my approval. She believes anything I tell her. She is a pathetic, useless woman, Mom. Once the old man is dead and we get the insurance money, I am going to divorce her so fast her head will spin. I am tired of pretending to love that clingy, spineless cow." The video ended. The screen went black. For a long moment, the only sound in the basement was the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Hannah stood motionless, staring at the dark screen. Her face was pale, drained of all color. The tears that had been streaming down her cheeks moments ago had stopped. She wasn't crying anymore. She was in shock. That is not real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He loves me. He calls me his princess. He calls you a cow when he thinks no one is listening, Hannah." I said, my voice hard. "He is not just trying to kill me. He is trying to erase you. He is using you as a shield until he gets the money, and then he is going to throw you away like garbage." I watched the realization hit her. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The denial, the excuses, the love, it all crumbled under the weight of the evidence. She looked up at me and the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else. Something dark and cold. It was rage. She picked up the iPad, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges. "He tried to kill you," she said, her voice trembling with a new kind of intensity. "He tried to kill my dad. And he called me useless." She looked at the stairs, then back at me. "What do we do?" she asked. And for the first time in years, she sounded like my daughter again. She sounded like a Walsh. "We stop crying," I said, closing the case. "And we start fighting. Are you ready to take your house back?" Hannah wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. "Tell me what to do, Dad." Hannah dropped the iPad onto the workbench with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet basement. She did not scream. She did not cry. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, as if she had been punched, and then she ran to the utility sink in the corner. The sound of her retching echoed off the concrete walls, a visceral, violent rejection of the reality she had just witnessed. The truth did not just break her heart, it sickened her physically. I stood there and let her purge the poison. She was vomiting up 3 years of lies, 3 years of gaslighting and the illusion of a happy marriage that had been nothing more than a long con. When she finally straightened up, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, she was a different person. The soft, pliable woman who had walked down the stairs minutes ago was gone. In her place was something raw and terrifying. She turned to face me. Her eyes were bloodshot, but they were burning with a hatred so intense it made the air around us feel electric. She looked at the stairs, then at the heavy pipe wrench hanging on the wall. "I am going to kill him," she whispered. Her voice was not hysterical. It was deadly calm. She grabbed the wrench. "I am going to go upstairs and I am going to smash his lying face in." She took a step toward the door, her knuckles white around the handle of the tool. She was ready to throw her life away for 5 minutes of satisfaction. She was ready to become the violent criminal he was already painting us out to be. I moved faster than my old joints should have allowed. I blocked her path, grabbing her shoulders with both hands. "Stop," I commanded, shaking her once hard. "Look at me, Hannah. Put it down." "Let me go, Dad," she hissed, struggling against my grip. He planned to kill you. He called me a cow. He is up there drinking tequila while you freeze. I want him dead. If you go up there with that wrench, you are doing exactly what he wants, I said, staring into her wild eyes. You attack him, he calls the police. He tells them your father brainwashed you. He tells them we are both unstable. He wins. He gets the house, he gets the money, and we go to prison. Is that what you want? Hannah stopped struggling, but she was vibrating with rage. Then what do we do? Do we just let him get away with it? No, I said, taking the wrench from her hand and placing it back on the bench. We do not let him get away with anything. But we do not fight him with violence. We fight him with intelligence. We destroy him completely, Hannah. We take his money. We take his freedom. We take his reputation. And we do it with a smile on our faces. I cupped her face in my hands. Her skin was ice cold. You have to be an actress now, I told her. You have to go back upstairs. You have to look him in the eye and tell him you love him. You have to pour him another drink. You have to make him feel safe. Because a man who feels safe makes mistakes. Can you do that? Can you swallow that bile and smile at the monster? Hannah took a deep, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the fire was still there, but it was controlled. It was cold. I can do it, she said. I will make him think he is the king of the world. And then I will watch him burn. We did not have much time. The clock on the wall tick-tocked like a bomb countdown. Todd would not stay at the bar forever. He would come home soon, drunk and entitled, expecting his wife to be waiting for him. I grabbed Hannah by the shoulders. Her eyes were dry now, hard as flint. She looked like a soldier preparing for a suicide mission. Listen to me closely, I said, keeping my voice low. This is the most dangerous part. You have to go back upstairs. You have to unlock the front door so he does not suspect I have tampered with anything. And when he comes in, you have to be the wife he thinks he owns. Hannah nodded, but I felt her tremble. I cannot touch him, Dad. I cannot let him touch me. You have to, I said, squeezing her shoulders. You have to apologize. Tell him you were emotional. Tell him you understand now that he is doing what is best for the family. Feed his ego, Hannah. It is a hungry beast, and if you feed it, it will fall asleep. I walked over to the workbench and picked up a rag. I wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. He is celebrating, I continued. So celebrate with him. Open the bottle of añejo tequila he keeps on the top shelf. Pour him a double, then pour him another. He is already drunk. It won't take much to put him over the edge. When he passes out, and only when he is snoring, you take the keys to my truck from his pocket. And you take his wallet. We need my credit cards back, but we also need his ID. We are going to need it for the police. Hannah took a deep breath. She smoothed her hair back, fixing the mess the tears had made. She straightened her posture. I watched my little girl disappear, and a cold, calculating woman take her place. I will get the keys, she said. Her voice did not shake. She turned and walked up the stairs. She did not look back. I watched the door open and close, swallowing her into the lion's den. I heard the deadbolt slide shut from the other side. She had locked me back in. It was part of the plan. If Todd came home and found the door unlocked, he would know something was wrong. I sat in the dark and waited. Time distorted. Minutes felt like hours. I sat on the cold concrete, my ears straining to hear the sounds of the house above. I heard the front door open 20 minutes later. I heard Todd's heavy footsteps. I heard his booming voice, loud and slurry. "Honey, I am home," he shouted. "Who is ready to be rich?" I held my breath. I heard Hannah's voice, soft and muffled. I could not make out the words, but the tone was submissive. It was sweet. It was the performance of her life. Then I heard the clink of glass. I heard music start to play. He was buying it. He was drinking the poison she was pouring, thinking it was nectar. I sat there in the freezing basement, visualizing the scene upstairs. My daughter pouring tequila for the man who planned to kill her father, waiting for his eyes to close so she could steal our freedom. I prayed the alcohol would hit him fast. I prayed he would not get violent before he got sleepy. And I prayed that when the time came, Hannah's hands would be steady enough to reach into the pocket of the monster without waking him up. The floorboards above my head creaked under the weight of celebration. I sat in the freezing darkness of the basement, huddled under the drop cloth, listening to the sounds of my own wake. Upstairs, the people who had plotted my demise were drinking my wine and dividing my assets while I was still breathing beneath their feet. It was a surreal kind of torture to hear the muffled laughter of your executioners. I could hear Beatrice's shrill voice piercing through the ventilation ducts. She was not at the hospital holding her husband's hand as he recovered from surgery. She was in my living room, sitting on my leather sofa and talking about money. She had moved on from the tragedy of the morning with terrifying speed. To her, Richard was just a broken tool, and I was just an obstacle to be removed. "So where are we shipping the old baggage?" she asked loud enough for the sound to carry through the floor. I did some research on that state facility in Trenton. The reviews are terrible. They say the staff is underqualified and the place smells like boiled cabbage and urine. But it is cheap, Todd. Dirt cheap. I held my breath, waiting for Hannah's reaction. She was up there right now, standing in the middle of the lion's den. I imagined her hands shaking as she held the wine bottle. I imagined the nausea rising in her throat as she looked at her mother-in-law. "Who cares what it smells like, Mom?" Todd replied, his voice slurring slightly. "Bernie's brain is mush anyway. He won't know if he is in the Ritz-Carlton or a dumpster. We dump him there Tuesday morning. We close the sale on the house Wednesday. And by Friday, we are on a beach in Cabo." I heard the clink of glass against glass. Hannah was pouring. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment. If she broke character now, if she let even a sliver of her rage show, we were dead. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to snap. Instead, I heard her voice soft and terrifyingly sweet. "You are right, Todd," she said. "We have to be practical. Dad would not want to be a burden on our future. The facility in Trenton sounds efficient." A single tear froze on my cheek. Not from sadness, but from pride. She was doing it. She was looking the devil in the eye and lying to his face. She was serving them cheese and crackers while they dissected her father's life, and she did not flinch. Beatrice cackled. "You know, Hannah," she said, clearly tipsy, "you are finally showing some backbone. I always thought you were too soft for my Todd, too sentimental. But maybe you are useful after all. Once we get the money properly invested, maybe we will keep you around. Useful." She talked about my daughter like she was a kitchen appliance. I clenched my fists in the dark, wishing I could reach through the floorboards and strangle the woman. But Hannah did not take the bait. "Thank you, Beatrice," Hannah said, her voice smooth as silk. "I just want Todd to be happy." "Speaking of happy Todd, I found that bottle of expensive añejo tequila you were saving for a special occasion. I think tonight qualifies, don't you?" I exhaled. The trap was set. "Pour it up, baby," Todd shouted, his arrogance filling the house. "Make it a double! No, make it a triple! We are rich!" I heard the glug of liquid pouring into a glass. It was the sound of the beginning of the end. Hannah was not just pouring a drink. She was pouring the fuel for our escape. I sat back against the cold concrete wall and waited for the silence that would follow the storm. 2:00 in the morning arrived not with a bang, but with the heavy silence of a graveyard. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. My legs were numb from the cold concrete, and my breath still hung in the air like white smoke, but my mind was razor-sharp. I had spent the last 2 hours visualizing this moment, rehearsing every step like I used to rehearse military drills. Then came the sound. It was soft, barely a whisper of metal against metal. The deadbolt slid back. The door creaked open just an inch. A sliver of light from the hallway cut through the darkness. Hannah was there. She was dressed in black jeans and a dark sweater moving like a shadow. She did not say a word. She just reached out a hand. I grabbed the railing and pulled myself up. My knees protested, popping loudly in the quiet stairwell. I bit my lip to keep from groaning. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion, but I climbed. I climbed out of the pit my son-in-law had dug for me. When I reached the top landing, the warmth of the house hit me like a physical blow. It smelled of stale tequila and expensive cologne. The smell of him. Hannah gripped my arm to steady me. Her fingers dug into my bicep. She pointed toward the living room. We had to pass through it to get to the front door. And in the center of that room, sprawled out on the leather sofa like a conqueror, was Todd. He was passed out, mouth open, one arm dangling off the edge of the cushions. An empty bottle of anejo lay on the rug. He looked pathetic, but I knew he was a sleeping viper. If he woke up now, if he saw us, he would not hesitate. He had the strength of youth and the desperation of a criminal. We moved across the hardwood floor. I placed my feet carefully, rolling from heel to toe to minimize the sound, just as I had taught Hannah when she used to sneak in late as a teenager. We were 10 feet away from him. 5 feet. Suddenly Todd shifted. He let out a loud snort and rolled onto his side, facing us. We froze. Hannah stopped breathing. I felt her body tense up, ready to run or fight. Todd's eyelids fluttered. He mumbled something incoherent, a slur of words that sounded like money and fire. His hand twitched, reaching out as if grabbing for something in a dream. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If his eyes opened now, I would have to hit him. I looked at the heavy crystal ashtray on the coffee table within my reach. I calculated the distance. I was weak, but I had one good swing in me. Todd groaned again, smacked his lips, and then settled back into the cushions. His breathing leveled out into a deep, rhythmic snore. Hannah let out a breath that was so shaky it was almost a sob. She looked at me and nodded. We started moving again. Past the sofa. Past the dining table where the divorce papers lay unsigned. Past the life I had built and lost. We reached the front door. Hannah turned the lock. It clicked. To me it sounded like a gunshot, but Todd did not stir. She opened the door and the icy winter wind rushed in to greet us. It was cold, but it tasted like freedom. We stepped out onto the porch, closing the door softly behind us. The driveway was covered in a thin layer of snow. My Ford F-150 sat there under the moonlight, covered in frost. Hannah held up her hand. The keys dangled from her fingers, glinting in the pale light. We did not run. We walked with purpose. We were not escaping anymore. We were advancing to the next battlefield. Before I climbed into the passenger seat of my truck, I asked Hannah to wait for just 60 seconds. I told her I had forgotten something, but the truth was I had one final connection to make. A mechanic never leaves a job unfinished, and I certainly was not going to leave my home without a proper security system in place. While I was trapped in the freezing basement, I had done more than just look for surveillance footage. I had prepared a housewarming gift for Todd and his cash buyers. I slipped back into the shadows of the utility closet located just under the stairwell. In the corner sat 4 50-gallon drums of industrial-grade carbon pigment. It was a relic from my days consulting for commercial printing presses. This was not the kind of ink you buy at an office supply store. This was a chemical compound designed to be permanent. It stains concrete. It penetrates drywall. If you get it on your skin, you wear it for a month. Todd had ignored these drums because he thought they were just trash. He saw ugly metal barrels taking up space. I saw ammunition. I knelt down by the main intake pipe for the house's fire suppression system. It was a modern sprinkler setup I had installed myself years ago, to lower our insurance premiums. With a few quick turns of my wrench, I bypassed the city water feed. I connected the heavy rubber hose from the ink drums directly into the system's intake valve. I tightened the clamps until my knuckles turned white, ensuring the seal was perfect. Then I pulled out the digital timer I had salvaged from the broken water heater. I wired it directly to the solenoid valve. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a lifetime spent building machines. Red wire to the positive terminal, black wire to the ground. I looked at the small LCD screen blinking in the darkness. I set the countdown for Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. I knew Todd's schedule better than he knew it himself. Tuesday at 9 was exactly when the final walkthrough with the new buyers was scheduled to take place. They would be standing in the living room admiring the crown molding and the refinished hardwood floors. Todd would be bragging about the open concept layout and the natural light. And then the timer would hit 0. The solenoid would open. The pressure would kick in, and every single sprinkler head in the ceiling, from the master bedroom to the kitchen, would explode. But they would not spray water. They would spray a high-pressure mist of jet black, indelible ink. It would coat the walls. It would soak into the expensive carpets. It would ruin the electrical wiring behind the plaster. In less than 3 minutes, my beautiful $1.5 million home would be transformed into a black, toxic hazmat zone. The damage would be catastrophic and completely irreversible. To fix it, you would not just need a cleaning crew, you would need to bulldoze the house and rebuild it from the foundation up. Todd wanted to flip this house for a quick fortune. He wanted to erase my legacy and cash out. Well, I decided to help him with the renovation. I was going to paint it for him. I stood up and wiped my hands on my pants. I looked at the timer one last time, watching the seconds tick away. Tick-tock, Todd. I walked back out to the driveway where Hannah was waiting in the running truck. The cold air felt good against my face. I climbed in and closed the door. Drive, I said, and do not look back. The heater in my truck was roaring at full blast, but it took 20 miles before the shivering finally stopped. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the streetlights of Chicago blur past like streaks of fire. Hannah was driving with a focus I had never seen in her before. Her hands were gripped tight on the wheel, and she checked the rearview mirror every 30 seconds, expecting to see police lights or Todd's sports car chasing us down. But the road behind us was empty. We were ghosts vanishing into the night, leaving nothing behind but a locked basement and a ticking time bomb in the plumbing. We pulled into the driveway of a brownstone in the historic district. It was 3 a.m, but the porch light was on. Alan Baxter was not just my attorney, he was the man who helped me patent my first engine design 30 years ago. He was a pit bull in a 3-piece suit, and he was the only person on earth I trusted with my life outside of this truck. Hannah helped me up the steps. The door opened before we even knocked. Baxter stood there wearing a silk robe and holding a tumbler of scotch. He looked at me, at my pale skin, and the canvas drop cloth still wrapped around my shoulders, and his face went hard. He did not ask what happened. He knew. Lawyers like Baxter know that when a client shows up in the middle of the night looking like a refugee, a crime has been committed. "Come in," he said, stepping aside, his voice grave. Inside his study the fire was lit. He poured me a drink. Not alcohol. Hot broth. He sat behind his mahogany desk and pulled a thick file folder from a drawer. It landed on the wood with a heavy thud. "I knew they would make a move, Bernie," he said, opening the file. "I have been tracking the court filings. They filed for the emergency sale of your home yesterday afternoon. They are claiming financial insolvency due to the jewelry store lawsuit. The hearing to finalize the sale is in 48 hours, Tuesday morning." Hannah gasped. "Tuesday," she said, her voice rising in panic. "That is in 2 days. Todd said he already had a buyer. He said the deposit was paid." "He does," Baxter confirmed, looking at the documents. And if that gavel bangs on Tuesday, the house is gone. The money goes into a trust that Todd controls, and you end up in a state facility. That is their timeline. It is tight, and it is aggressive. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. But here is the good news. I have already drafted the counter motion. We are not just going to block the sale. We are going to file for a full revocation of the guardianship based on fraud, abuse, and attempted murder. We are going to drop a nuclear bomb on their little parade. He looked at me critically, scanning my trembling hands and my sunken eyes. But there is a problem, Bernie. To win this, I need you to take the stand. I need you to look that judge in the eye and prove you are competent. Right now, you look like a victim. You look exactly like the senile old man they claim you are. If you walk into that courtroom looking frail and confused, the judge might believe their lies about dementia. I straightened my back, pushing through the pain in my joints. I am ready, I rasped. Baxter shook his head. Not yet. You are not. You have 2 days. We need to get food in you. We need to get you rested. We need to shave that beard and get you in a suit that fits. You have 48 hours to turn back into the man who built an empire. You need to look like a CEO, not a prisoner. Can you do it? I looked at Hannah. She nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it hard. We will be ready, I said. Baxter smiled, a slow, predatory grin. Good. Then let's get to work. While you rest, I am going to make sure that when Todd walks into that courtroom, he is walking into a trap he never saw coming. Todd thought he was a master of finance because he knew how to log into my online banking, but he made a rookie mistake. He assumed that everything I owned was visible in the light. He froze my checking account, my savings, and my retirement fund, and he thought he had cut off my oxygen supply. He did not know about the Archimedes Trust. It was a separate limited liability company I had established 30 years ago to hold the royalties from my first automotive patent. It was not in my name. It was not connected to my Social Security number. It was a ghost account sitting in a bank in Delaware, and it was holding a war chest of liquid cash that Todd could not touch. I sat in Baxter's leather chair sipping black coffee while the sun began to rise over the city. I felt the strength returning to my body. The lawyer slid a thick dossier across the desk. It was a financial autopsy of Richard's life. It is worse than we thought, Baxter said, tapping the paper. Richard is not just broke, Bernie. He is underwater. The dealership is leveraged to the hilt, but that is not the problem. The problem is his gambling. I opened the file. There it was in black and white. Richard had a habit. He liked high-stakes poker, and he was terrible at it. He had borrowed money from a private lending group to cover his losses. These were not the kind of people who sent late notices in the mail. These were the kind of people who sent men with baseball bats. He owes $400,000 to a syndicate operating out of the South Side, Baxter explained. They are getting impatient. They know about the accident. They know he cannot work. They are ready to start seizing assets. I stared at the number. 400,000. To Richard, that was a death sentence. To the Archimedes Trust, it was a tactical investment. Call them, I said, my voice steady. Baxter looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Call who? Call the syndicate, I said. Tell them you represent an anonymous investor who is willing to buy Richard's debt. Offer them 50 cents on the dollar. Tell them they can have 200,000 cash wired to them within the hour, or they can try to squeeze blood from a stone. Richard is crippled, and his business is failing. They will take the deal. Baxter smiled. He understood the play immediately. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. If we buy the note, he said, leaning back, we become the priority creditor. We are not just buying debt. We are buying leverage. Exactly, I said, closing the file. If I own that debt, I can call it in whenever I want. I can foreclose on his dealership. I can put a lien on his house. I can seize every single asset he has, including the shirt off his back. Todd and Beatrice think they are waiting for a payday from my estate. They do not realize that I am about to become the owner of their entire existence. Baxter picked up the phone. He made the call. I listened as he negotiated with the calmness of a man buying a used car. He spoke in legal terms, but the message was clear. We were offering a lifeline to the sharks, and they were biting. 10 minutes later, Baxter hung up. He typed a few commands into his computer. The wire transfer was initiated. "It is done," he said. "The promissory note is being transferred to your trust as we speak. Congratulations, Bernie. You are now the legal owner of Richard's nightmares." I looked out the window at the morning sky. I imagined Richard lying in his hospital bed, worrying about the men coming to break his legs. He did not know that the man holding the bat was now the same man he had mocked and underestimated. I was no longer just a victim. I was the bank, and the bank always collects. The bathroom mirror in the guest suite of Baxter's house became the altar where my daughter sacrificed her former self. For 10 years, Hannah had worn her hair long and wavy because Todd said he liked it that way. He told her short hair was masculine. He told her he wanted a wife who looked soft. So when I walked past the open door and saw her standing there with a pair of fabric shears in her hand, I stopped. I did not say a word. I watched as she grabbed a handful of those golden locks and squeezed the blades shut. The sound of the scissors slicing through the hair was a sharp, violent whisper. She did not cry. With every lock that fell to the tiled floor, she looked lighter. She was cutting away the weight of his expectations. She was cutting away the fear. When she finally emerged from the room an hour later, she was transformed. Her hair was cut into a sharp, angled bob that framed her face like a helmet of steel. She had traded her pastel sweaters for a tailored black suit that Baxter's assistant had rushed over from a downtown boutique. She did not look like a suburban housewife anymore. She looked like a CEO walking into a hostile takeover. She sat across from me in the study, her posture rigid. She looked at her hands for a moment, and then she asked me the question that had been haunting her. "Dad, are we bad people?" she asked softly. "We are planning to ruin them. We are going to take their home, their reputation, and their money. Is that justice, or is it just cruelty?" I put down my coffee cup. I looked at this woman who I had raised to be kind and generous. I realized I had to teach her the one lesson school never did. The lesson I learned in the trenches of American industry, Hannah. I said, my voice low and serious. When I started my company, I was like you. I wanted to be fair. I wanted everyone to win. But I learned very quickly that there are people in this world who do not play by the rules. To them, kindness is not a virtue. It is a weakness to be exploited. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Todd and his family are not just bad people, Hannah. They are predators. They saw your kindness, and they sharpened their knives. If we stop now, if we show them even an ounce of mercy, they will not be grateful. They will use that mercy to destroy us. They will put me in a home, and they will leave you with nothing. I saw the conflict in her eyes. The little girl who wanted to save everyone was fighting with the woman who needed to survive. In business and in war, I continued, there is no middle ground. You cannot defeat a monster by being polite. You have to be colder than they are. You have to be smarter than they are. And yes, you have to be ruthless. Not because you enjoy it, but because it is the only way to ensure they can never hurt you again. We are not doing this to be cruel. We are doing this to remove a cancer from our lives before it kills us. Hannah looked at me. She took a deep breath, and I saw the last of the doubt evaporate. She touched the sharp ends of her new hair. You are right, she said, her voice steady. He called me useless. Tomorrow I am going to show him exactly how useful I can be. We sat there in the quiet of the study, two soldiers cleaning their weapons before the dawn. The storm was coming. But for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of the thunder. I was the one bringing the lightning. The air in courtroom 4B was stagnant, recycled, and heavy with the scent of cheap lies. I stood outside the heavy double doors, adjusting the cufflinks on my crisp white shirt, while my attorney, Alan Baxter, checked his watch. We were exactly 1 minute late. It was a calculated delay designed to let the drama inside reach its boiling point before we turned down the heat. Inside, I knew exactly what was happening. Todd was currently giving the performance of a lifetime. He was standing before the Honorable Judge Sterling, playing the role of the devastated son-in-law to perfection. He would be dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief, explaining how his beloved father-in-law had wandered out of the house in a fit of dementia. He would be telling the court that I was missing, lost in the winter cold, and that the only responsible thing to do was to liquidate my assets immediately to pay for the search and rescue efforts. His lawyer, a man who looked like he chased ambulances for a living, was undoubtedly pressing for the emergency motion. They needed the judge to sign the order allowing the sale of the house to go through by noon. They were painting a picture of urgency. They were claiming that without this money, the family would be destitute and unable to care for the tragedy that had befallen them. I could imagine the judge's face. She would be sympathetic. She would see the young man trying to hold his family together in the face of a medical crisis. She would be reaching for her gavel, ready to grant the motion that would hand over my life's work to a thief. Baxter looked at me. He nodded once. It was time. The bailiff opened the doors. They swung wide with a heavy wooden groan that cut through the hushed murmurs of the courtroom. The sound was authoritative. It demanded attention. Every head in the room turned. Todd turned around slowly, wearing a mask of practiced tragedy. But when his eyes landed on me, the mask shattered. I was not the shivering, confused old man he had locked in a freezing basement. I was not the frail victim wrapped in a canvas dropcloth. I was Bernie Walsh, the engineer who had built a fortune from steel and sweat. I was wearing a bespoke Navy suit that cost more than Todd's car. My face was clean-shaven. My back was straight as a steel beam. I walked down the center aisle with the confident stride of a man who owns the building. Beside me, Alan Baxter moved like a shark in calm waters, carrying a briefcase that contained the destruction of Todd's entire world. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Todd's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, as he realized that the dead man was walking. I stopped 10 feet from him. I did not look at the judge yet. I looked directly at Todd. I saw the panic flare in his eyes. I saw him look at the clock on the wall, realizing that his timeline had just been incinerated. "Your Honor," Baxter announced, his voice booming off the walls without the need for a microphone. "I apologize for the interruption. However, I represent Mr. Bernard Walsh, who is standing right here, and I can assure the court that reports of his disappearance and his dementia have been greatly exaggerated." Todd sank back into his chair, his legs giving out beneath him. He looked small. He looked weak. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked terrified. Panic is a powerful fuel, but it burns dirty. I watched Todd scramble for a foothold as the ground crumbled beneath him. He looked at me standing there in my tailored suit, looking like the CEO I used to be, and he realized his narrative about the frail, senile old man had just evaporated. He could not sell the judge on my weakness anymore. So in a moment of desperate improvisation, he decided to sell her on my rage. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white, and turned his eyes toward Judge Sterling. His voice shook, but not with fear. He forced it to shake with a performance of victimhood. "Your Honor," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This just proves what I have been trying to tell the authorities. He is not just confused, he is violent. The reason we had to secure him in the home was not just to keep him from wandering off. It was to protect my wife. It was to protect myself." A murmur ran through the courtroom. I felt the heat rise in my neck. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. He was accusing me of the very violence he had inflicted upon us. Todd saw that the judge was listening, so he poured more gasoline on the fire. He has a history of aggression, Todd continued, his confidence growing with every lie. He attacked me in the garage 2 nights ago. He threw a wrench at my head. He threatened to burn the house down. That is why we locked the basement door, Your Honor. We were terrified. We were living in a hostage situation in our own home. I started to step forward. I wanted to roar. I wanted to tell the judge that this man had drugged me and frozen me and left me to die. But Alan Baxter placed a heavy hand on my forearm. His grip was like iron. Let him talk, Baxter whispered without moving his lips. Do not interrupt him. Every word he says is another nail in his coffin. Baxter stood up slowly. He did not object. He did not shout. He looked at the court reporter who was typing furiously on her stenotype machine. Mr. Walsh, Baxter said, addressing Todd with a voice that was terrifyingly polite. Just so the court is clear on the record, you are stating under oath that my client physically assaulted you and that you locked him in the basement solely for the purpose of self-defense. Is that your official testimony? Todd hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at me, then he looked at the judge. He was too far in to turn back now. Yes, Todd said, lifting his chin. That is the truth. He is a monster. Baxter nodded slowly, like a teacher grading a paper. Thank you, Mr. Walsh, Baxter said. We just wanted to make sure that accusation was captured perfectly on the record before we proceed. Todd smirked. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the lawyer. He did not realize that Baxter had just handed him a shovel, and Todd had eagerly started digging his own grave. The trap was set, and it was time to spring it. Baxter stood in the center of the courtroom and adjusted his tie with the calmness of an executioner checking the rope. He did not raise his voice to object to Todd's perjury. He did not argue with the lies. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out the battered iPad that Hannah and I had recovered from the basement. He held it up like a holy relic. Your Honor, Baxter said, his voice cutting through the tension. The petitioner claims that my client is a confused and violent man who needs to be institutionalized for the safety of the family. He claims he acted in self-defense. However, we believe the court should see the events of that night with their own eyes before making a ruling. He plugged the device into the court's AV system. The large flat-screen monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. The courtroom lights seemed to dim as the grainy black and white footage from my garage filled the room. For a moment there was confusion. The audience squinted at the image of the dark garage. Then the figure crawled into the frame. It was huge on the screen. Todd. He was wearing the same mechanic gloves he had claimed were mine. He was holding the wire cutters. The audio was crisp and amplified by the courtroom speakers. The sound of metal snapping echoed off the mahogany walls. Snap. Snap. Then came the voice. Todd's voice. Arrogant and clear. Yeah, Mom, it is done. I severed the line cleanly. The fluid is dripping out slowly. By the time he gets on the highway tomorrow for his checkup, the reservoir will be empty. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock that rolled from the back benches to the front. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys in disbelief. The stenographer looked up with her mouth open. On the screen, the digital Todd laughed. Ideally, he crashes on the hairpin turn on Route 9. That drop is 200 feet. In the courtroom, the real Todd stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like gravity had pulled it straight down into his shoes. He gripped the table, his eyes bulging, as he watched his own crime play out in high definition. He looked at his lawyer, but the man had already taken a step away from him, physically distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of a murder plot. Judge Sterling rose from her bench. Her face was no longer sympathetic. It was thunderous. She looked from the screen where a man was planning a death to the man standing in front of her, who had just sworn an oath to tell the truth. She slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. "Bailiff," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "Secure the doors. No one leaves this room." Two uniformed officers moved instantly, blocking the heavy double doors at the back. The click of the locks engaging was the loudest sound in the world. Todd spun around, looking for an exit, looking for a way out, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in a box of his own making. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the truth. I was not the victim. I was the witness, and I had just delivered the verdict. The video had stunned the room into silence, but Alan Baxter was not done. He knew that in a war you do not just wound the enemy, you finish them. He walked back to the table and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was not a digital file or a recording. It was a physical document with a blue border and an official state seal. It was the title to the 1969 Mustang Boss 429. Baxter held it up for the judge to see. "Your Honor," Baxter said, his voice calm and precise. "The petitioner claims that my client gifted this vehicle to Richard Davis. He claims that the transfer of ownership was complete and that Mr. Davis assumed all liability for the vehicle's condition." Baxter walked over to the witness stand and placed the document in front of a trembling Todd. "Mr. Walsh," Baxter said, pointing to the bottom of the page, "can you please read the signature line for the transfer of title? Is it signed by my client?" Todd looked down. His eyes darted across the paper, looking for a loophole that did not exist. "No," Todd whispered. "It is blank." "Exactly," Baxter said, snatching the paper back. "The title was never signed. The transfer was never processed. Legally speaking, that car still belongs to Bernard Walsh, which means, when you crawled under the chassis and cut those brake lines, you were not just setting a trap for your father. You were committing felony vandalism and destruction of property against my client." Todd slumped in his chair. He realized the legal trap he had walked into. If the car was not Richard's, then the narrative of the generous gift fell apart. But the real blow was yet to come. Baxter turned to the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Stephen Reynolds to the stand." A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stood up from the gallery. He did not look like a lawyer. He looked like an actuary. He walked to the front of the room carrying a briefcase that looked heavy with bad news. "Who is this?" Judge Sterling asked, peering over her glasses. "I am the lead counsel for Liberty Mutual Insurance," Mr. Reynolds announced. "We hold the liability policy for the vehicle in question. Or rather, we did until 5 minutes ago." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a rejection letter. Based on the video evidence just presented to this court, he continued, addressing Todd directly. "It is clear that the crash was not an accident. It was an intentional act of sabotage. Insurance policies do not cover criminal acts, Mr. Walsh. We are hereby voiding the policy effective immediately. We will not be paying the $2 million in damages to the jewelry store." Todd let out a sound like a dying animal. He knew what that meant. Without insurance, the debt fell directly on the driver. Furthermore, Mr. Reynolds added, twisting the knife, "Since you and your father filed a claim knowing the crash was staged, we are countersuing both of you for insurance fraud. We will be seeking punitive damages, and we will be forwarding our findings to the district attorney." The room erupted. The gavel banged. But I did not hear the noise. I only saw Todd. He was staring at the table, knowing that he had just bankrupted his family and sent himself to prison in a single afternoon. The financial safety net was gone. The house money was gone. And he was free, falling into an abyss of his own creation. The silence in the courtroom was heavy enough to crush a man, and Todd was already flattened But we were not done yet because you do not leave a snake alive to bite you another day. Alan Baxter returned to his briefcase, and he did not look at the judge or the bailiff. He looked directly at the gallery where Beatrice was sitting. She was clutching her fake designer bag, looking pale but defiant, still believing that even if Todd went to jail, she would be safe in her own home. She was wrong. Baxter pulled out a document that was not on court bond paper, but on thick, textured stationery. It was the transfer of debt agreement we had signed only hours ago, Your Honor, Baxter said, his voice smooth and deadly. There is the matter of the outstanding liabilities. It has come to our attention that Mr. Richard Davis, the father of the petitioner, is currently in default on a private loan totaling $400,000. Todd looked up, and his eyes glassy. He knew about the loan. He knew the kind of violent men his father had borrowed from. He probably thought the loan sharks were coming to break legs. He did not realize the shark was standing right in front of him in a navy suit. As of this morning, Baxter continued, holding the document aloft. My client, Bernard Walsh, has purchased that debt in full. The promissory note has been transferred. Mr. Walsh is now the sole creditor for the Davis family estate. Beatrice made a sound like a strangled cat. She stood up halfway in the pew, her hands gripping the wood in front of her. She understood the math instantly. Since the insurance company has denied the claim, and since the dealership is technically insolvent due to the owner's incapacity, Baxter said, flipping the page, we are exercising our right to call the loan immediately. We are filing for an emergency asset seizure to satisfy the debt. He turned to look at Todd, who was shaking his head in disbelief. We are taking the dealership, Baxter listed, counting off on his fingers. We are taking the commercial property it sits on. We are taking the inventory. But since that will not cover the full $400,000 plus interest, we are also moving to foreclose on the Davis family primary residence on Elm Street. No, Todd gasped. You cannot do that. That is my parents' house. It is collateral, Baxter corrected him, cold as ice. And we are collecting. We are also seizing all personal vehicles and any bank accounts associated with the debtor. By the time we are done, Mr. Walsh, the only thing your parents will own is the clothes on their backs. I watched Beatrice. I watched the reality hit her. She was a woman who defined her entire existence by appearances. She lived to look down on others. She lived for the country club lunches and the illusion of status. And in 3 sentences, my lawyer had just stripped her naked in front of the world. She was not just broke, she was homeless. She was destitute. Her face turned a color I had never seen on a human being, a mix of gray and green. She put a hand to her throat. She looked at me standing there, healthy and wealthy, and holding the deed to her life, and her brain simply could not process the reversal of fortune. My house, she whispered loud enough for the room to hear. Then her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. It might have been a performance for sympathy, or it might have been the genuine shock of a narcissist losing her supply. But she went down hard. She hit the wooden bench with a sickening thud and crumpled to the floor in a heap of faux fur and cheap perfume. Mom, Todd screamed, trying to stand up, but the bailiff pushed him back down into his chair. Order, Judge Sterling shouted, banging her gavel. Medical assistance to the gallery immediately. I stood still. I did not rush to help. I did not look away. I watched the paramedics rush in to treat the woman who had demanded I pay for her husband's mistakes. I felt Hannah's hand slip into mine. Her grip was strong. We watched the empire of lies crumble into dust, and neither of us shed a single tear. While the gavel was banging in the courtroom, sealing Todd's fate, a different kind of judgment day was arriving at Mercy General Hospital. Richard Davis was lying in a private recovery room, a luxury he had demanded despite not having the insurance to cover it. His legs were encased in heavy plaster casts elevated in traction pulleys. He was staring at the ceiling, high on morphine and self-pity, waiting for his wife to call and tell him that they had secured my money. He thought his biggest problem was learning how to walk with a cane. He did not know that he would never walk as a free man again. The door to his room did not open with the gentle swoosh of a nurse checking vitals. It swung open hard, hitting the wall with a thud that made Richard jump. Two men walked in wearing cheap suits and carrying the heavy atmosphere of law enforcement. They were not patrol officers. They were detectives from the State Financial Crimes Division. Richard tried to summon his usual arrogance, but it is hard to look intimidating when you are wearing a hospital gown and drinking apple juice through a straw. "You cannot be in here," he slurred, his words thick from the medication. "I am in recovery." "Get out." The older detective walked to the side of the bed and looked down at Richard with a look of pure disgust. He did not ask how the patient was feeling. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Richard Davis, you are under arrest," the detective said, his voice flat and professional. Richard laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Arrested for what?" "A traffic accident." "My lawyer will have your badges for harassment." The detective shook his head. "Not for the accident, Mr. Davis, although the insurance fraud charge on that is pending. We are here about the warehouse fire in 2018, and the stolen inventory claim from 2020, and the flood damage payout from last year." Richard stopped laughing. His face went stark white, matching the sheets. Those were his secrets. Those were the scams that had kept his dealership afloat for a decade. He had buried the evidence. He had paid off the inspectors. No one knew. Except me. I knew. I had spent years collecting the paperwork, noting the discrepancies, and saving the emails. I had handed the entire file to the district attorney that morning. "We have the ledger," the detective continued. "We have the emails between you and the adjusters you bribed. It is over, Richard. We are charging you with 6 counts of grand larceny, 4 counts of insurance fraud and racketeering." Richard tried to sit up, but the pain in his shattered legs slammed him back down. He gasped, reaching for the call button to summon help, but there was no help coming. "My wife," he gasped. "Call my wife, she will fix this." The detective smirked as he clicked one cuff onto Richard's left wrist and the other to the metal rail of the hospital bed. "Your wife is currently being treated for shock at the courthouse after finding out you are homeless," the detective said. "And your son is in a holding cell. You are all alone, Richard." The weight of the words crushed him. The pain in his legs was nothing compared to the agony of his reality. He was 60 years old. He was crippled. He was bankrupt. And he was going to spend the rest of his life in a prison infirmary. He looked at the handcuffs gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He had spent his whole life trying to look like a rich man. Now he was just a number. I was not there to see it, but I heard that for the first time in his life, Richard Davis started to cry. Not for his family, but for himself. And across the city, I sat with my daughter, and we finally allowed ourselves to breathe. The kings were dead. Long live the truth. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight is a unique mechanical noise. It is sharp and final, like a trap snapping shut on a wolf's leg. I stood by the prosecution table and watched the bailiff pull Todd's arms behind his back. The arrogance that had defined him for the last 3 years was gone. It had drained out of him, leaving behind a sweating, trembling shell of a man who realized too late that he was not the hero of this story. He was the villain, and the movie was ending. Todd twisted in the officer's grip, scanning the room with wild, desperate eyes. He was looking for a lifeline. He looked past his lawyer, who was already packing his briefcase. He looked past the judge, who was signing the remand order. And then his eyes landed on Hannah. She was standing next to me in her sharp black suit, holding a manila envelope. She looked like a statue carved from ice, beautiful and utterly unyielding. Todd lunged toward her, pulling the bailiff with him. "Hannah," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Baby, please. You have to stop this. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I did it for us." He was doing what narcissists always do when they are cornered. He was trying to weaponize her love. He was trying to flip the switch that had controlled her for so long. I was under so much pressure, Hannah. He pleaded, tears streaming down his face. I just wanted to secure our future. I did it for you, Princess. Please do not let them take me. Talk to your dad. Tell him to drop the charges. We can fix this. I love you, Hannah. I love you so much. I felt my muscles tense, ready to step in and protect her from his poisonous words. But Hannah put a hand on my chest, stopping me. She stepped forward. She walked right up to the rail separating the gallery from the well of the court. She looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. She did not look sad. She did not look conflicted. She looked bored. She reached into the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. She tossed them over the rail. They landed on the floor in front of Todd's knees. "It is not a mistake, Todd," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "And you did not do it for me. You did it because you are a small, greedy man who thought he could get away with murder." Todd looked at the papers. Even upside down, the bold text at the top was legible. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I am not your princess. Hannah continued cold as the winter wind outside. I am the woman who owns everything you thought was yours. I am taking the house. I am taking the car. I am taking the savings, and I am taking back my name. The bailiff hauled Todd to his feet. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was losing his wife, his freedom, and his money all in the span of 10 seconds. Hannah, he sobbed. You cannot do this. We are partners. Sign the papers, Todd, she said, turning her back on him. Do it before you get processed. It will look better for you at sentencing if you cooperate. She stopped and looked over her shoulder one last time. Her eyes were dry. Her expression was empty of any affection. And do not waste your phone call on me, she added, because I am not coming to visit. I never want to see your face again. Enjoy the cell, Todd. I hear it is very cold this time of year. The bailiff dragged him away, kicking and screaming through the side door. His wails echoed in the hallway until the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the noise. The silence that followed was beautiful. Hannah took a deep breath, smoothing the lapel of her jacket. She looked at me and smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on her face in years. It was the smile of a woman who was finally free. While Todd was being processed at the county jail and trading his Italian suit for an orange jumpsuit, the timer in my basement reached 0. It was 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. The schedule was absolute, and the execution was flawless. Back at the house, the scene was set for a tragedy of a different kind. The real estate agent had unlocked the front door with a flourish. She was leading a couple from downtown through the foyer. These were the cash buyers Todd had bragged about to his mother. They were young and wealthy, and they were wearing pristine cream-colored coats that probably cost more than my first car. They walked onto the white wool rugs looking at the crown molding and talking about how they were going to tear out the kitchen and modernize the layout. They were standing in the center of the living room, directly under the main chandelier, when the plumbing groaned. It started with a deep shudder that vibrated through the floorboards. The buyers stopped talking and looked up at the ceiling. They probably thought it was just the pipes settling in an old house. They were wrong. It was the sound of justice moving through copper pipes. The solenoid valve in the basement clicked open. The pressure from the 50-gallon drums of carbon black ink was released into the fire suppression system. There was a sharp hissing sound, and then the ceiling erupted. It did not spray clear water. It sprayed a thick, jet-black chemical mist that hit the room with the force of a fire hose. The industrial pigment coated the walls in seconds. It turned the white rugs into a swamp of darkness. It soaked the buyers from head to toe, ruining their designer clothes and dyeing their skin a permanent midnight blue. They screamed. They ran for the door, slipping and sliding on the slick black floor, leaving frantic handprints on the walls like a scene from a horror movie. But the system was efficient. The ink followed them into the hallway. It sprayed into the kitchen, covering the stainless steel appliances. It sprayed into the bedrooms, soaking the mattresses. In less than 3 minutes, the interior of the house was destroyed. It was no longer a home. It was a black box. The fallout was immediate and financial. The buyers did not just walk away, they ran straight to their lawyers. They were suing for breach of contract. They claimed that the seller had failed to deliver the asset in the agreed condition. They demanded the immediate return of their deposit, plus double damages for the ruined clothes and the emotional distress. And since the preliminary contract was signed by Todd, acting as my guardian, the liability fell squarely on his shoulders. He was already in debt to me for $400,000. Now he owed the buyers another $100,000. He was buried under a mountain of litigation that he could never climb out of. As for me, I sat in Alan Baxter's office and looked at the photos the insurance adjuster sent over. The house was a total loss. But here is the beauty of reading the fine print. My homeowner's policy had a very specific clause regarding vandalism and malicious mischief caused by unauthorized occupants. Since the court had just ruled that Todd's guardianship was fraudulent and his presence in the home was effectively trespassing, the destruction was covered. The insurance company would pay to gut the house. They would pay to replace the drywall, the floors, and the furniture. I would get a brand new home paid for by the chaos my enemies had created. Todd had tried to sell my life out from under me. Instead, he had just paid for my renovation. I looked at the picture of the black living room, and I finally laughed. It was the most beautiful paint job I had ever seen. The view from the 42nd floor of the Walsh Industries building was breathtaking. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a jagged horizon of steel and glass gleaming under the summer sun. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified to stand this close to the edge. 6 months ago, I was afraid of my own shadow. But the woman who used to flinch when a door slammed was dead and buried. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal. I sat at the head of the mahogany conference table. The room was filled with department heads, men who had worked for my father for 20 years. They used to look at me with pity when I came in to bring Todd his coffee. Now they looked at me with something else entirely. Respect. And perhaps a healthy dose of fear. I tossed the quarterly report onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. The projections for the logistics division are conservative, I said, my voice steady and cool. We are not cutting the R&D budget to pad the bottom line. My father built this company on innovation, not on corner cutting. Rewrite the budget. I want it on my desk by Monday morning. The VP of Finance nodded quickly, making a note. Yes, Ms. Walsh. Right away. The meeting adjourned. As the room cleared, my assistant Sarah walked in. She looked hesitant, holding a small gray envelope as if it were radioactive. Ms. Walsh, she said softly. This came in the mail today. It was marked personal, but I recognized the return address. It is from the correctional facility in Joliet. She placed the letter on my desk. The handwriting was cramped and messy, scrawled with a cheap prison pencil. It was Todd's handwriting. I looked at it. For a moment, I waited for the old panic to rise in my chest. I waited for the heart palpitations, the sweaty palms, the urge to fix whatever was wrong. But nothing happened. My pulse did not quicken. My hands did not shake. I felt absolutely nothing. It was like looking at a piece of junk mail. I picked up the silver letter opener my father had given me when he named me interim CEO. I slit the envelope open with a clean, precise motion. I pulled out the single sheet of lined paper. My dearest Hannah, it began. I hope this letter finds you well. I have been doing a lot of thinking in here. I have found God, Hannah. I realize now how much I hurt you. I was sick. I was under so much pressure. But I am changing. I am becoming the man you deserve. Please do not ignore me. I need money for the commissary. The food here is terrible. Please, Hannah. I know you still love me." I read the words and I almost laughed. Even from behind bars, he was trying to manipulate me. He was playing the victim, the penitent sinner, and the beggar all at once. He did not miss me. He missed my checkbook. He missed the comfort I provided. He was a parasite starving without a host. I did not finish the letter. I did not crumble it up in a rage. Rage requires energy, and Todd was no longer worth my energy. I stood up and walked over to the heavy-duty shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the letter into the slot. The machine whirred to life, a satisfying mechanical grind as it chewed the lies into unrecognizable strips of confetti. I watched the paper disappear. That was the last word he would ever say to me. I walked back to my desk and pressed the intercom button. "Sarah," I said, my voice crisp. "Yes, Ms. Walsh. If any more mail comes from that address, shred it immediately. Do not even bring it into the office." "Understood, Ms. Walsh." I swiveled my chair around to look at the city again. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. He was at the lake house fishing, enjoying the retirement he had almost lost. The text read simply, "Proud of you." I smiled. I picked up my pen and went back to work. I had a company to run, and I had no time for ghosts. The water on the lake was flat as glass, reflecting the oranges and purples of the setting sun. I sat in my folding chair, with a fishing rod in my hand, feeling the gentle tug of the current against the line. Behind me, parked on the gravel access road, sat my brand-new pickup truck. It was not a classic like the Mustang, and it did not have the memories of the old Ford, but it had something better. It had working brakes. I reeled in the line a few inches just to keep the bait moving. It is funny how much time you have to think when you are not fighting for your life. Lately, I have been thinking a lot about mechanics. I spent 50 years building engines, designing systems to make things go faster and pull harder. I was obsessed with torque and horsepower. I thought the measure of a machine was how much power it could put down to the pavement. But I was wrong. Todd thought the same way. He lived his life with his foot pinned to the floor. He wanted the fast cars, the fast money, the fast lifestyle. He thought that if he just moved quickly enough, he could outrun the consequences. He looked at a braking system and saw a hindrance. That is why he cut the lines on my car. He did not just want to kill me. He wanted to remove the friction. He wanted to remove the only thing standing between him and the cliff edge of his own greed. I looked at the bobber dancing on the surface of the water. A family is like a high-performance vehicle. It runs on love. Love is the fuel. It is what drives us to work hard, to sacrifice, to build a home. But love without discipline, love without boundaries, is just an engine redlining in neutral. Eventually, it blows up. We need brakes. We need the cold, hard steel of logic. We need the friction of the law. We need the ability to say no. For a long time, I was afraid to apply the brakes with Hannah. I wanted her to ride smooth. I wanted her to be happy. But by not teaching her how to stop, I let her get into a car with a man who had no steering wheel. I had to become the brake. I had to be the screeching tires and the burning rubber. I had to slam the family into a wall to save it. It was violent, and it was ugly, and it left marks on the road that will never wash away. But we are alive. We stopped before we went over the edge. I reached into the pocket of my vest. I pulled out an old cracked smartphone. It was the one I had used during the trial. It still had the contact numbers saved in the memory. Beatrice, Richard, Todd. The names of the people who had tried to scrap me for parts. I weighed the phone in my hand. It felt heavy, not with grams, but with history. It held the text messages of their lies and the voicemails of their deceit. I do not need this anchor anymore. Hannah is running the company, and she is running it with a spine of steel. She knows that kindness is a gift, but respect is earned. She knows that you cannot drive through life hoping everyone will move out of your way. Sometimes you have to hold your line. I stood up and pulled my arm back. I threw the phone as hard as I could. It arced high into the twilight sky, spinning end over end. It hit the center of the lake with a satisfying splash. I watched the ripples spread out, pushing the calm water away until the surface was smooth again. The secrets were at the bottom of the lake where they belonged. I sat back down and cast my line out one last time. The air was cool and clean. I was just an old man fishing. I was a father who had done his job. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead was clear. The most powerful lesson from Bernie and Hannah's journey is that true love is not about blind acceptance. It is about having the courage to set boundaries. We often think that protecting our family means shielding them from every hardship, but sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let them face the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Bernie showed us that dignity has no expiration date, and that kindness without wisdom is just an invitation for betrayal. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has built a life with their own hands, because when pushed into a corner, they will not just survive, they will rewrite the ending. If you cheered for Bernie's victory, hit that like button and share this story to remind the world that you should never mess with a master mechanic.